Good afternoon and welcome from the University of Georgia Office of Research. Today is Tuesday, March 1st, 2022. And thank you for joining us for Research Live. My name is Mike Terrazas and I'm the Director of Research Communications at UGA. In today's session, we're going to talk about graduate and postdoc visas, immigration options in STEM fields. And I'm thrilled to see such a strong turnout for this topic. We'll try to provide all of you with useful information and answer your questions as best we can. Before we get started, just a couple quick housekeeping points. When we take questions following the presentation, you can ask your question through the chat, through the Q&A, or through the raise hand function, whichever you like. You should see all those options along the bottom of your Zoom window. If you raise your hand, we'll assume you want to ask your question by voice. So I'll call on you by name and enable your microphone while you ask your question. We'd love to hear any feedback you have about today's session, including suggestions for future topics. The Research Live page on the Office of Research website has a suggestion form that you can access through a red button at the top of the page, and we encourage you to make use of it. I'll drop the URL for that page into the chat window in just a bit. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. Let me introduce our speakers today. We've got Shelley Hooks, Associate Vice President for Research Personnel in the Office of Research, Robin Katmer-Smith, Director of Immigration Services in the Office of Global Engagement, and Dan Berger, Partner in the immigration law firm of Curran, Berger & Clute, based in Northampton, Massachusetts. Dan is on the Legal Advisory Board of the President's Alliance on Immigration and Higher Education, and he's also a member of the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services Liaison Committee, as well as the recently formed Afghanistan Task Force for the American Immigration Lawyers Association. So we'd like to thank Dan for lending his time to be with us today. And with that, Shelley, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you all for being here today. I am very excited to help co-host this session. Hopefully you'll get lots of information. And I'm here today based on my role in the Office of Research, where I oversee the Office of Postdoctoral Affairs. And more than half of our postdocs are international scholars. And so this is a very important community for us. You're a very important part of our research mission and everything that we do at UGA. And we know that there are special challenges for international scholars, grad students, and postdocs. So really happy to be able to provide this important information. And I'm very grateful that Robin Katmer-Smith reached out to me to invite me to help co-sponsor this event. Hopefully all of you are familiar with Robin and her role as Director of Immigration Services. And if not, I just want to make sure you all know that she is a fierce advocate for international scholars and a tremendous resource. We're very lucky to have her here at UGA. And so I'm happy to turn it over now to Robin.
Thanks so much, Shelley. And thank you to the Office of Research for agreeing to co-host this information session for us. We were speaking before we opened this session, and Dan had made the comment that it was a nice change to be able to share positive information in the area of academic immigration specific to STEM students and researchers. And he mentioned that it has been a difficult few years in the past, and we are seeing more positive policy changes in the US for international students and scholars, and we're very pleased about this. The office at UGA, a lot of people don't know that we are dedicated only to immigration processing. So the programming and support for international students runs through Student Affairs and is managed by the Office of Student Life. So we actually have 8 people on staff who report to me, and all we do is immigration sponsorship. So in a normal year, we have about 3,500 foreign nationals who come here to study and do research. So it's a big population. And I think it speaks to why we had such a great turnout for this session. I am pleased to say that Dan and I go back many decades. We've worked together. Prior to my time at UGA, when I was at Dartmouth College, I knew Dan, and he is also a fierce advocate and did lots of pro bono work for us. He's an expert in specifically academic immigration. And so we're very happy to welcome him here today. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Dan, and he can begin to share some of this good information.
Right. Well, thanks very much, Robin. And it's a pleasure to present with you again, and Shelley for hosting, and Michael for coordinating. This is breaking news, really, and don't, I'm going to take a step back and show you how we got here, just explain a little bit of what some of the different proposals and the different policies have been over the last few years. But the new proposals that sort of led to this presentation today, we're really just at the end of January, and it always takes time. I mean, no matter how carefully we read them, no matter how carefully these proposals were written, there are always lots of questions, and it's probably going to take months for us to really understand them and understand how creatively we can use them. But for now, let me take a step back and just explain where we've been. This article is from 2012, talking about trying to create a startup visa. This has been something that Congress has been considering for a long time. As I'm sure I don't need to tell you, immigration in the United States is complicated, and trying to get Congress to agree on almost any change to immigration is difficult, even something like entrepreneurs, which tends to be a little more bipartisan. So this startup visa has not happened, even though it's been introduced several times. Most of the American immigration system really dates back to some of it to 1990 and most of it to 1965. So you really have a system that was created for a completely different economy, and actually a completely different world, that we're now trying to work with. So because there was not an ability because Congress hasn't updated the immigration system, the Immigration Service over the years has tried to help. And what are the ways that the Immigration Service can try to help without Congress? Well, there are two things they can do. One is just to try to get information out. This was a portal that was set up during the end of the Obama administration to try to basically to try to provide information to entrepreneurs, to scientists, to people who are engaged in work here. In addition to providing information, there has also recently been an effort to try to provide some updated guidance. Again, the Biden administration can't change the laws, only Congress can change the laws. But the Biden administration can provide updated guidance and updated policies that sort of use the laws to the maximum in order to support researchers, business people, and so forth. So this is part of an article that we wrote early on, right around the Biden transition time, just arguing that they should try to look through the laws and see what they can do without Congress. And thankfully, some of those things happen. Now, I'm not saying it was us, but I'm saying this is really the strategy right now, is to try to, what they're doing is they're literally going through every program, every visa category, and trying to see how the guidance can be clearer, and try to see how maybe there can be a little more creative use of those programs to support researchers and international employees. And just again, quickly, I'm gonna skip this one for a minute. Immigration is a game of categories. I think probably all of you know that. There are temporary visa categories, there are green card categories. So no matter what we do have to think about how to listen to what each of you want to do and then fit you into a category. Some of you will fit very nicely into a category, some of you may not. And what we've tried to do over the years is think about ways that we can be more creative, so that you can do more than so you can do more different things. And the most common situation for postdocs is moving into industry. How do you do that? And we'll talk about that in a minute. Or working on the side. How do you get involved with a startup that one of your friends or one of your professors is getting involved with? Okay. Well, let me just tell you what we had before January 22nd, when these new policies came out. The closest thing we had to a startup visa was really the e-visa. And I don't think there's really a better way to explain this. The United States has treaties with all of these countries that create something that's a little bit like an entrepreneur visa. So if you are getting involved in a startup, you can try to to work with the e-visa, but it's a challenge. And the Obama administration had also created something called entrepreneur parole, which was stopped during the Trump administration, is now back, but there isn't really a workflow. This is a great idea, and I think we should all just keep this in the back of our mind, because I hope that by the end of the year it will be working better. The National Venture Capital Association sued a couple of years ago to try to save this program. And basically what it does is what those startup visas we're trying to do, but it does it through executive action. So we're not going through Congress, we're just using discretionary powers that the government has. And I love this visa because basically what it does, it's not a visa, I love this category, because what it does is it says immigration officers may have trouble evaluating a business. It's difficult to know. If you looked at Uber, probably when somebody was first suggesting it, you might have thought it was a bad idea. And so the person who took Robin's job used to work with Amazon, and way back in the 90s, that looked pretty risky too, to put money into that. But the entrepreneur parole rule says if you can get money, if you can get roughly $250,000 from an established investor, so an angel investor, venture capitalist, and so forth, or an incubator, or if you can get about $100,000 from a government grant, an SBIR grant or a small business grant, and so forth, then the government is going to kind of assume that it's a good idea. They're going to assume that people who know how to evaluate businesses, and they'll give you a chance, and you can get up to 5 years renewable of time to try to work on that business. Again, this is not really working yet because the program is back, but the workflow isn't there. They haven't figured out exactly how to make it work, but it's coming, and I'm excited about this, and I want us all to realize, because it may be relevant to some of you over the years. And before we get into the new policies, I do want to say just a quick warning for all of you. It is very easy and very tempting to do work on the side. You get so excited about your research, your professor says, oh, can't you just help out with the company? The F and J visa rules are very strict. The H-1B visa rules are very strict, and government officials do Google people. They don't do in-depth searches, but they do Google. So I've seen people get into trouble where they're doing something on the side, it's on their LinkedIn profile, they're mentioned on a company website, there's a press release from some kind of entrepreneur competition on campus, and that gets into the campus newspaper, and that's on the internet forever. So just be aware that for now, if you're on an F or a J or an H visa or an O, only do what it says you can do, and then let us help you try to figure out how to do more if you want to by changing your visa category. Okay. This was the press release that came out of the White House on January 21st, 2022. And it began with the administration believes one of America's strengths is the ability to attract global talent, strengthen our economy, technological competitiveness, and benefit working people and communities across the country. Well, this is great. This is what we were hoping to hear. So let's dive in and talk about some of the creative programs that are there. So the first, and there are basically 5 of them. Some of them are easier to understand than others. Number 1 is an expanded STEM OPT. OPT, I think you probably all know, is an F1 is a student visa. OPT means time that you can work in your field after you graduate. It has always been frustrating that the extra 2nd and 3rd year of OPT, which is for people in STEM fields, didn't include some cutting edge fields: cloud computing, climate science, mathematical economics. There are a lot of them, data visualization. These people in those fields only got 1 year of OPT instead of 3 years, which means they had to spend more time thinking about trying to squeeze into another category. 22 new fields have been added, and there's been an invitation to try to suggest more. I was a little disappointed that healthcare related fields weren't included. It seems to me that medicine and dentistry are science fields, but regardless, all of these are really very much appreciated additions to the STEM field. And I would encourage, if you have other ideas, they do seem to be open to suggestions, and it's worth trying. Number two is the O1 visa category has been updated. The O1 visa, basically, I think you probably already know, the H-1B is a professional working visa that is for, that it involves a lottery to work at a private company. And the O1, there is no lottery. There are an unlimited number of O1 visas. In the past, companies tended to try to avoid the O1 visa because it's subjective. It involves marketing the person and showing that they are extraordinary in their field. Different immigration officers respond differently to, some have higher approval rates, some had lower approval rates. We know, just because we've been following it, that Officer 214 in Nebraska denies a lot of these. And so it's hard for a company to spend a lot of time creating an individualized application and then have it be denied. There was some general guidance issued that said that encouraged officers to consider O1s for people in STEM fields. They also added more guidance about comparable evidence. So in the law, in the statute, it talks about different kinds of evidence that you can use, scholarly publications, peer reviewing for journals, and so forth. But a lot of times, some of the best evidence is not necessarily what was written in the statute in 1990. So for example, if you have a blog that has 10,000 followers, that may be very interesting. Or if you have a Twitter feed that's followed by, tens of thousands of people in your field, that may be very interesting, but there was no real place to put that in here. And the O1 is all about marketing. So this comparable evidence guidance basically says, if you think something is relevant, if you think something is impressive, just explain why. And you don't need to show that you can't find that the other categories don't apply. You can add in new. They also changed the way compensation is used. In the past, if you got a really high salary in your field, you could use that as evidence of extraordinary ability. But that doesn't always work for people who are just getting their first job out of a postdoc. So what they did was they changed it to say compensation. So you can now include stock options, you can include other kinds of compensation that are not necessarily just money. The third one is updating the national interest waiver. And this is really, really interesting. And you can see why, they really needed to understand the immigration system to figure out how to make this work. The national interest waiver is a self-petition green card. And I'm gonna go through a couple of case studies in a minute, but basically the ability to normally you need to have an employer or a family member to sponsor you. So if you're married to a US citizen, if you have a full-time, long-term job at UGA can sponsor you. But if you're a postdoc, UGA cannot sponsor a green card for you because a green card is permanent residence and a postdoc is temporary. So, so the only way to do it is a self-petition. And these national interest waivers were just really tough. It's what it sounds like. The national interest waiver involves making an argument that having you stay in the country and having you get a green card is good for the United States. So, if you can imagine, if you're working on, electric car batteries and trying to make them better, and that's the research you're doing, you could argue that having you here is good, but it was very subjective. And what they've done here is they've updated the guidance to say, if your work is related to one of the critical fields, and I'll share the link, but they've identified a variety of critical fields that are government priorities in STEM. It's kind of assumed that having you here is good, and then you still need to show that you're not just if you have a bachelor's degree in engineering and you've never done and you've only taken one class on electric car batteries, that's probably not going to work. But if you're at the postdoc level, we're really thinking that these national interest waivers are going to be very beneficial, and they're going to allow people to apply for green cards years earlier, because they won't have to wait for either for their CV to be extremely long, or for them to finish a postdoc and get a job. And sometimes when you get a job, the company doesn't want to sponsor you for a green card right away. It really gives more control to the researcher. You can also argue government priorities. So beyond this critical fields list that was issued, you can use other government documents. So for example, if the National Science Foundation or NASA or the NIH puts out a document that says these are our funding priorities, you can use that and move your case forward.
If I could jump in here, Dan, I'll
Yeah,
say
please.
that this was really exciting to me. One of the disappointing conversations I tend to have with UGA people is the postdoc who contacts me and says, you know, I really would like a green card sponsorship. What do I do? And I certainly talked to them about that national interest waiver and refer an outside attorney, but it was always really challenging. And I'm getting the feeling now that they are literally encouraging them to apply under the national interest waiver. So I found this really exciting.
Yeah, and I will have to say that the national interest waiver, because of the category it's in, is still significantly backlogged for people who were born in India or China, unfortunately. But it is that the category is now easier to use. And then this one, we're still learning. Like Robin and I are on a working group just figuring out how this is going to work. But this one, I think, is the hardest to understand. And I think in a way, one of the ones that can be most exciting. Right now, as a postdoc, many of you, if you're not on STEM OPT, are probably using a J1 scholar category. And that J1 scholar category is good for up to 5 years. Robin and I both get calls regularly from people who've done a year or two of postdoc who say, oh, you know, I'd like to apply for a job in industry. And then I have to tell them, look, we can only we could try to do a national interest waiver for you, which could be, in the past, was expensive or complicated. We could try to see if you could find a company that would do an O1 for you. We could try to wait until March so you could go through the annual H-1B lottery and hope that you get it, even though it's only about a 35% chance of success. So there's really no great option for something that I imagine, you know, happens all the time, where you have somebody who's a postdoc who finds a job in industry. And I was really surprised to learn that 90% of research in the country, of funded research, happens in private industry. So so that there are a lot of opportunities that international postdocs have had a hard time doing. And what this is basically saying is that the J1 can be used to work on site at a private company with the company as the host. You still need a program sponsor. So it would still require either a third-party sponsor or a university to feel comfortable doing this. And I think it's too early at this point for that to be really clear. But I'm optimistic that by the end of the year, there will be universities and third-party sponsors that are comfortable considering this option, especially once we get more guidance. We're going back to the government officials who created this program with weekly calls, just explaining all the questions that have come up. And I think this number 4, to me, has the most questions. And we are pushing very hard for more guidance. I think if we can get more guidance, universities will feel more comfortable using it.
Yeah, and I will say, Dan, again, I think for me, I've been dealing with the Department of State in the role of a sponsor for a J1 program, like I say, for the better part of 25 years. And this constitutes a real shift in how they are looking at the J1 program. They are actively encouraging academic institutions to partner with STEM businesses in the United States to allow this J1 visa sponsorship for those private companies to advance research in the US. And I think this could be really useful in the circumstance, say, you know, a faculty member, a PI at UGA has a funded grant and he's got a startup company and he really needs a couple of his postdocs to work for that company. we can now facilitate that, whereas in the past, the answer was no. As Dan says, we are still looking for guidance and clarification on this, but I will tell you that I think this is really exciting and has a lot of opportunity for it.
Yeah, and I think you know, I think the big question and that we'll get more guidance on is how, if the J1 program is a UGA J1 program and the person is working on site at a professor's company, how much does Robin's office need to be watching them? Do they need to get the company to sign something saying they will let them know if anything changes, or should Robin's team be checking in regularly? And I think that those are some of the questions that need to be worked out, but they can be worked out. Those are reasonable questions. And then the last one, I hope I'm wrong, but you know, I think we've talked about this, Robin, and it doesn't seem very useful, but I'll just tell you about it because it's the last one. And on our call with the government folks tomorrow, where, you know, one of the questions we put forward to them is, it doesn't seem as if this is very useful. Are we missing something? So I may have more for you, but basically, people on J1 visas, students on J1 visas are eligible for academic training, which is basically kind of like OPT after finishing a degree. In the past, the amount of academic training was limited after a bachelor's or a master's. It wasn't the full 3 years that one could get from a PhD. Now they're expanding that up to 3 years for bachelor's or master's, but capping it at the length of the program. So if it's a 2-year master's, you only get 2 years of academic training anyway. So I'm not sure how helpful this is going to be, but we're watching. And any thoughts on that, Robin?
You know, I can see where it might be helpful for bachelor students who would get more than the 18 months. But certainly if we're looking at, you know, advancing master's degrees, and the majority of master's degrees, master's and PhD degrees in the US are awarded to foreign nationals. So I would hope that they would make some allowance for those master's students.
Yeah, and there are some governments like I think Turkey, Thailand. There are a few governments that sponsor masters, and they do have a cap on the number of years that somebody can stay. And it might, you know, there probably will be some discussions with those governments to see if they can be a little more flexible. If somebody is able to stay 3 years, let's say for a master's, maybe they could get 3 years of academic training and really get a really robust research experience. But we'll see. All right, so those are the programs. I guess maybe we've started to do this, but it might be worth just going through the most common fact patterns just for a second. So again, you have a postdoc in the second of 5 years as a J1 scholar at the university, is offered a dream job in a university, in industry. And again, here, the challenges in the past would be to try the H-1B lottery, which is only once a year and is a 30-something% chance of success, to try to squeeze into that O1 category, which is better now, but it is still objective. And it does require a fair amount of work on behalf of the employer. It's not every employer is going to wait several months to work on an O1 application. To try a self-petition green card, which in most cases the postdoc would pay for, and on a postdoc salary. But now it may be possible to use that remaining J1 time, the 3 years left of J1 time, through the university to work at that private company, which gives 3 shots at trying the H-1B lottery. If you have three chances, 3 years where you can try the H-1B lottery, and it's 35% chance each, you have a good chance. It's also possible that the employer could start a regular employer-sponsored green card. So in the immigration system, having more time is always incredibly helpful to try to open up other categories. It's very difficult for us to do something quickly, but transferring a J1 from one activity to another, if there is something that's quick in our business, that can be relatively quick. And then another, let's say a company wants to sponsor an employee for a green card, but the company doesn't have regular income. So I'm thinking, in this example we keep talking about, where you maybe want to work for one of your professor's companies, one requirement for sponsoring an employer-sponsored green card is to show company tax returns and to show that the company can afford to pay you a full-time market rate salary. Now, some companies just don't have the cash flow for that yet, or they haven't filed a tax return yet. And there's a big advantage to filing a green card, because filing a green card gets you in line for an unrestricted work card, for travel permission that will allow you not to have to apply at a US consulate for a visa to get back. And it gets, so now this new national interest waiver category is really exciting, because the national interest waiver is a self-petition that can be supported by an employer. And I think that there's a hope that employers will now have one more tool for sponsoring green cards. Right now they have the regular Department of Labor process, which is slow and requires financial documents. They have a research category, which we call EB1, which also requires those financial documents. And then employers will have this third option, which is the national interest waiver, which doesn't require any financial documents. It just requires an argument that the work is related to this critical field list or to government stated priorities. So I think I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a minute. I imagine there are questions, so I'd love to
I'm
go to your
answering a
questions.
couple of them in the chat, Dan, but I think
Sure.
there may be a couple more coming in.
Yeah, and there's quite a few in the Q&A too.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me ask one from one of our attendees. How far in advance can a graduate student apply for an OPT before completing their program? For example, if I'm completing my program in June, when can I start the OPT application process?
You can start that application process earlier than the regulations allow you to file it. So what I mean is, if you want to have everything ready to file, you can contact our office, say at 4 months before you graduate. You are not allowed to actually apply or file it earlier than 90 days in advance of the date you complete your program. Our advisors are pretty careful to check the dates and to let you know. But you can work to get everything assembled a little bit earlier than you're actually allowed to file.
Great, thanks, Robin. Here's another one. I get started to file a green card through NIW EB2 category. Currently, I'm filing I-140 and it is pending now. So my question is, will I be able to file an H-1B while the I-140 is pending? Or does filing an I-140 affect the approval of the H-1B visa while I'm working for a nonprofit organization like a university?
All right, well, I guess since I am a lawyer, I have to give a caveat and say I'm just giving general advice, and obviously without seeing all your documents, I'm just giving general advice, and it would be good to talk to the attorney who's working on the H-1B just to be ready. But in general, green cards and temporary visas are two completely separate processes. So filing an H-1B while you're working on a green card is not by itself a problem. Often the most important thing to think about is international travel. If the person is going to travel, they'll want to think very carefully about where they are in the green card process and whether the travel will be, and how difficult it will be to travel on the H-1B. So.
Gotcha. Thanks, Dan. Another question. Thank you for all this information. My question is it fine to file two petitions simultaneously? For instance, EB1 and EB-2 NIW petitions, which could be the best option between those two for a person working as a postdoc in STEM?
Okay, so what that's about is that, again, there are a lot of different green card categories. There's almost never a problem with filing green cards in multiple categories. We tend to do this mostly with doctors who have even more categories available to them. And sometimes some of my doctor clients just want to try 2 or 3 green cards and see which one comes through first. I'm okay with that. In general, the issue really is time and money. What we try to do is think about, well, which green card category do you get the most bang for your buck? We think that in the next few weeks, there will be an announcement about premium processing for national interest waivers. Right now, the negative about national interest waivers is that they're slow, and there's no way to make them faster just by paying an expedite fee. So right now, the advantage of that EB1 category is that you can pay more money to get a faster service. EB1 is also a big advantage for people born in China or India because there's either no backlog or a much smaller backlog. It's a higher category. But the EB1 category is a much higher category. It involves showing that you are top few percent in your field with sustained acclaim. Now, you know, we spend a lot of time marketing people. I think anybody who is, I mean, I think there's an argument that anybody who's done a PhD is the world's expert on something. And so the question is, you know, but the EB1 category is harder. It's harder to show your top few percent in your field with sustained acclaim than it is to show that having you here is good for the United States, which is the national interest category. So short answer is it's fine to file both, but what we do generally is we try to pick one and start with that, unless money is no object, but usually money is an object.
Thanks again, Dan. We've got several questions here. For a current PhD student, can I apply for a green card in the meantime while keeping my F1 visa?
So, I mean, the technical answer is yes, you can apply for the green card. I think that the thing to think about is that J1 visas and F1 visas require temporary intent. So if you apply for the green card, you basically will not be traveling again on that F or J status. And even if the green card is denied, it will be very difficult or risky to travel on the F1 or J1. So I do have some people who say, look, it's more important to me to try to get the green card. I'm willing to say, I'm willing to not travel later on if that person gets an H-1B or another visa that doesn't require temporary intent. It may be possible to travel again, but that's the balance is, you know, are you willing to stop traveling in order to try the green card? And that's a conversation.
And I will say, maybe Dan doesn't remember this, but I think you and I worked on a white paper for NAFSA back in the early 2000s or mid 2000s on how academic institutions and specifically offices like mine would handle a case where a student was maintaining F1 student status but had a pending green card. And we commit to keeping the F1 record active as long as the person is still full-time enrolled, doing what they need to do under the F1 regulations. So we don't terminate your record if we know you have a green card pending. But as Dan says, you need to be careful about leaving the country and having to come back in or apply for a new visa, because that's at the point that they are going to assess whether you have that temporary intent. If you're filing for a green card, you don't have that temporary intent. And one other situation I'll mention, and Dan can maybe talk about this a bit, is if you are an F1 student and you fall in love and you get married to a US citizen, I would be careful traveling with that US citizen spouse, because they can also question your temporary intent because you're now married to a US citizen. Why would you not stay here forever?
Yeah, and you may have announced this, but I think right on Christmas Eve, the Biden administration changed the guidance a little bit on temporary intent for Fs. Under the previous administration, it was a very strict temporary intent requirement where if the officer thought there was a chance you might stay here longer, you could be denied, which, as you can imagine, created a lot of uncertainty because every officer has different assumptions. And that was a challenge. But on Christmas Eve, the guidance was updated, or actually backdated, to some old George Bush guidance, which said that just to be reasonable, like most of you are young, you probably don't know exactly what you're going to be doing in a few years. You may, when you leave your country to come here for a postdoc, you may not you're not going to keep an apartment there. You may not keep a bank account there. So, so don't assume that just because somebody comes here for a postdoc that they're definitely going to stay. But if something is right in the face of the officer, if you are traveling with your U.S. citizen spouse, if you do have a green card file, then there's an issue. And we think this guidance seems to be applied to J's, although it's not in writing yet.
Next question: if I have an F visa, would you advise trying to change it to a J visa?
Well, I think this is a good moment to say that anything that has to do with Fs or J visas is Robin's office. So this if you're thinking about changing from F to J, I'm sure one of her advisors could talk you through this. J visas may allow a spouse to work, which can be an advantage, but J visas may also come with strings attached, such as a 2-year home residence requirement. So
I would say come and talk to us about the reasons why you want to change to a J. If it's to take advantage of, this J1 STEM initiative, then we can certainly talk to you about it. But everyone's situation is unique, so we'd want to look at, the reasons, what country you're from, how long you've been here, things like that.
Yeah, great.
And also just really quickly, changing from F to J is not quite as simple as it sounds. If you do it by mail here, it's going to take a very long time. If you travel, you might be stuck
like
for
a
while.
year.
Yeah.
Ridiculously long.
Next question: would it be a good idea to ask an employer who does not sponsor an H-1B to sponsor an EB-2?
Yes, I mean, I would.
You can always ask.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to find out why the employer doesn't sponsor. And a lot of the talks I give are co-sponsored by the Career Office. And what I tend to hear is not necessarily UGA, but just in general. What I tend to hear is that if the employer is advertising something broadly, like if Google puts out a job ad online, and and they get 10 really talented people applying for a spot, it's going to be very difficult to get an employer to do anything different for you. And it's going to be a lot easier for Google to hire a US citizen. On the other hand, if you get a job through an internship or networking with a UGA alum, for internationals, the targeted networking job search is much better than the going to a website or going to a job fair, because you're not competing, it's you. And so in those cases, if you get a job offer, let me know if the employer seems nervous. Like if it is Google, they know what they're doing, and if they say no, they say no. But if it's a smaller mid-sized company, they might be saying no just because they heard it's hard, or they don't know, or they're scared. And if that's the case, then it may be worth talking to them, and I can help you talk to them if you want. You can say that the lawyer who came to UGA can help you. You're just offered to help explain things, and maybe they're just scared, and maybe there's no reason to be scared. But the nice thing about the national interest waiver sponsorship is that it really doesn't require anything. H-1B sponsorship requires signing forms that say you'll agree to a site visit, you'll agree to a Department of Labor audit, you'll agree to pay a certain salary, and even if you don't have enough work for the person. So the H-1B is a bigger deal, and the national interest waiver, there's really almost no requirement for the employer except that anything that's said in there is true.
Mm.
Great, thanks. I just want to thank everyone for your engagement and all the questions that are coming in. I'm just going to cycle through them by the timestamps on them, and we hope to get to all of them as quickly as we can. So next question is, what documents are needed for an OPT application?
This is not a short answer, and our office has really, really good detailed online trainings for how to file for OPT. So I would recommend going to our website, immigration.uga.edu, and/or contact us at immigration@uga.edu and ask for the information on how to apply for OPT, and we can get you all of that.
Great, thanks, Robin. Do you have an idea of how much it might cost if I want to file for an NIW green card?
So I am hoping that we can lower our fees if this program really works the way it says it will. I'd like to see a pattern of decisions, and I'd like to see if we can streamline some of our applications. Right now, I think with most law firms, a national interest waiver, including the filing fees and the final personal application, we consider about a $10,000 investment, usually unless somebody is from India or China, over about 2 years. So that would be start to finish for the green card. So it's a big deal, especially on a postdoc salary.
And when Dan talks about India and China, the backlogs for them to be able to apply for those immigrant visas right now are for China, I want to say a couple of years, and for India, it's probably 10 to 12 years. So it's much longer.
Yeah, and just quickly, I don't know what you've heard, but it's not because American law says that Indians and Chinese should wait longer. It's because the law was written in 1965. So what they did was at that point, 80% of green cards came from Northern Europe. And so the 1965 immigration law says, well, let's make our country more interesting. Let's say only 7% of green cards can come from any one country. And in 1965, it was a pretty good idea. And it actually did diversify the country a little bit. But now, obviously, India and China are huge, highly educated countries, and a lot of people coming, and they just use up their 7% fast. And there are some thoughts in Congress on how to deal with that, but for now it is an issue.
Next question. I'm a third-year PhD student and I did my master's at a US university. My visa expires in a few months. Is there a way to apply for a visa renewal without traveling to my home country, as US consulates are overflowing with applications?
No. There is not, unfortunately. That was one of our proposals years ago. It was possible to do stateside visa renewal, but not anymore. I hope it'll happen. I will say, I don't know what you're seeing, Robin, but it's starting to get a little better. It was really awful to try to get visa appointments during most of the pandemic. They've just added 20,000 visa interview waiver spots in India this spring. So it's not great, but it's much better trying to get a visa appointment than it was last year.
Yeah, it is in a lot of countries, it's getting better. Yeah.
What about the scenario when we have to apply for internships as international students during our PhD years? Do we need OPT or CPT then also when we're applying for those internships?
Generally, yes. If you're doing an internship off campus or at an unaffiliated location, then you would need CPT. But you can contact our office and get more information about that.
If an employer starts the process of sponsoring the green card, but the employee under third year of OPT does not get the H-1B on his or her last lottery, is the process for the green card lost, given that the person didn't get the H-1B visa and his OPT expires soon?
No, the green card continues independent of the temporary visa. The goal is to keep up a series of temporary visas until you get far enough in the green card to get a work card. So in that case, if you're running out of STEM OPT and the green card isn't ready yet, then the goals would be to try to find another kind of visa, like an H or an O or something else, or to perhaps to work abroad while waiting for the green card. But the green card is not lost.
Can an international PhD student with a bachelor's degree from a non-US university apply for a green card under a national interest waiver criteria?
The national interest waiver requires at least an advanced degree, either from the US or from abroad. So I think the question was, with a bachelor's degree, the answer would be no, unless the person can show some kind of exceptional circumstances. But in general, national interest waivers are for people with advanced degrees.
Okay. I am an F1 PhD student in STEM applying for an initial OPT, but I'm applying for both postdoc and assistant professor positions. How can an OPT help with either position, and what can be done to work longer in the United States?
I can jump in on this. The OPT allows you to work in the US in any position that is related to your field of study. So either an assistant professor or a postdoc biochemistry, if that's where your degree is, would be appropriate. Certainly, if you get a teaching position, it can make the process of applying for a green card easier than if you take a postdoc position. Working in the US longer, again, that just depends on your situation, what visa options are open to you, what your employer is willing to sponsor, how quickly you can get a green card started, lots of variables for that.
Yeah, and I'll say just quickly, I know we're trying to do a little bit of a lightning round on the remaining questions, but a lot of times new faculty want to move on to the H-1B because they think it's the best visa. The H-1B is a better visa for travel during a green card process, no question. But the OPT is more flexible because it allows you to do things on the side. With an H-1B, the faculty member can't consult. The faculty member can't take an honorarium for giving a talk or reviewing a book chapter. So it's worth discussing before, because once you leave OPT, it's gone.
Could you please briefly, hopefully, explain the difference between an O1 and an EB1?
So an O1 is a temporary visa and an EB1 is a green card. As a practical matter, on paper, the categories are the same. They both involve showing that the person has extraordinary ability as one of the top few % in the field. As a practical matter, even though the categories are the same on paper, it is a little easier to get an O1 than an EB1 green card because the Immigration Service is more ready to give out a 3-year visa than permanent residence.
I'm working as a postdoc in the university with my initial OPT, but I'm not sure whether my current employee, maybe that means employer, yeah, can help me in my STEM extension. How can I get this information, or how can I know my current university is E-verified?
So you would need to speak to the Human Resources Office at your university. If you are at UGA, I can tell you if we are E-verified, and we are. There is certain information that you need for a STEM extension, including that E-verify information, among other things, and you would get that from my office. So if you are under a STEM OPT from Harvard and you need to extend that, you need to go to Harvard's international office and ask them for the I-20 that recommends a STEM extension. But there is information that you would need to get from my office, and there's information that you would need to get from your supervisor at the institution you're working at.
Great, thanks, Robin. If you are on an OPT doing your postdoc and you have an NIW application file, can you still travel?
I think it's risky.
Yeah,
if you have
can, but yeah. I don't think you want to.
Okay. If I'm working on an OPT in STEM and an F1 visa and I apply for a green card, can I travel because of the intent to stay?
I think that's the same question, really. It's just, it's risky.
Gotcha. Okay. How long does it typically take to process the EB2 NIW visa category? And is it advisable to travel out of the country while on an OPT?
Okay, risky to travel. And right now, and national interest waivers are really slow. They're taking well over a year. But I think it's possible that they were just holding on for this new guidance and not doing much. So they do seem, they're starting to speed up. And also I do think I think this spring we're going to get new guidance that says that there is a paid expedite for national interest waivers, which is 15-day service.
Right. Can your private employer help you or support your EB1 application for outstanding researcher or scientist?
Yes. So the EB1 outstanding researcher is an employer-sponsored application. So 90% of the application is about you. It's about your research and your recognition in the field, but it is still employer-sponsored. The employer does not have to pay for it by law. The employer does have to pay for an H-1B by law. The employer does have to pay for at least part of a regular green card that goes through the Department of Labor. There's no rule about who pays for it, but the employer would have to sign it. So the employer can sign it and sponsor it, and can pay for it if you negotiate that.
Can we have the national interest waiver criteria and critical field list sent to us?
Yes, I will email that right after the call, and you can share it around.
Okay. Just want to follow up with a question about employer-based EB2. What would be the cost and time for the filing? Thank you.
An employer-based EB2, that usually is about a $10,000 project also, over a couple of years. Roughly half of that by law should be paid by the employer, and the rest is negotiable.
If you are a J1 and wish to file for national interest waiver, but you have a 2-year residency clause, do you have to get a waiver of the 2-year residency before you apply?
You need to get a waiver of the 2-year J1 home residence requirement to file the final personal application. Every green card ends with a personal application that's it's a medical exam and a visa history and a criminal background check. And to file that, you need the J1 waiver. You can start a green card earlier. You could file a research petition. You could do other pieces of a green card, but you won't be able to finish the green card until you get that waiver.
Can your employer apply for your green card even when you are physically outside the United States?
Yes.
Will you speak more about the alternative to sponsorship for the H-1B visa? Also, you said that with the H-1B visa sponsorship, the sponsor is agreeing to continue to pay the person even if they're not working. Please elaborate.
Okay. In terms of alternatives to the H-1B, it's immigration is a game of categories. So we go through in our minds, O visa, E visa, L visa, and try to think if anything else would work. The H-1B does require a set salary, and it's called benching if an employer has somebody on an H-1B who's not getting paid because there's not enough work. So the employer would have to withdraw the H-1B if there really isn't enough work, or just keep paying the salary. That's the law.
Let's see. Can I still have a chance to get a 5-year F1 visa after the expiration of my current F1 after administrative processing?
Mike, I did answer that by typing, just in the interest of time.
Sure thing.
So I think they can see the answer in the chat.
Okay. When you're an OPT, are you still on F1, and does that create problems for traveling outside the US? I feel like we've spoken.
Answered that one as well, and the answer is yes, you're still on F1 status, and you should still be able to show temporary intent.
Is there a difference in tax filing between an H-1B and an OPT?
Let me jump in here. Yes, there is. We're not going to talk about international taxation today because that's a whole nother 5-hour session. You can contact the Office of International Student Life at UGA, and they will give you assistance in this area. But yes, there is a difference.
I've heard from other students that you can stay in the United States even if your F1 visa expires, but your I-20 remains valid because you're still pursuing your graduate program. Is that true?
Correct. The visa that the consular officer puts in your passport is like a movie ticket. It gets you into the theater, but it can expire while you're there. If you leave the theater to go buy more popcorn, you may have to show that ticket to get back in, though.
Great analogy. If I get married to a US citizen during my PhD program, how long does it take before I can travel, and can I apply for jobs in the meantime?
So the marriage to a US citizen is another category of green card. So if you get married and then file for a green card, it may take 10, 11 months to get a travel document or a work card. So in general, I think the strategy would be to try to keep up the F1, the OPT, the temporary visa, and then think about the right time to file the green card. I will just say really quickly, not everybody I work with ends up staying in the US. I try to help people stay here, but every year I have people who get married and then they file a green card because they think it's the thing to do. And then 2 years later, they call me and say, I just got my dream job in Switzerland. And then you can't keep a green card if you're not living here. So I would just take a deep breath if you're married and your temporary visa is working for you, unless you're really sure you want to stay here.
We're in the home stretch. Just a few more questions here. Can you explain more about the difference between traveling to Canada or Mexico and to other countries with an expired F1?
Robin, do you want to do that one?
Yeah, so travel to Canada and Mexico falls under a regulation that allows re-entry to the country with that expired visa. They assume that your entry and your presentation of those documents will allow you to enter the US. They revalidate the expired visa essentially for that one entry. Now, it's not quite as simple as that. There are some cautions and some things that you need to be aware of, but it is called automatic revalidation. And if you are planning to do this, please do contact my office first so we can make sure you have all the information you need. Traveling to other countries with an expired F1 visa, you would need to make an appointment at a US embassy, even in that third country, and receive the new F1 visa before you come back to the US. You are allowed to apply as a non-immigrant in any country. However, if you do apply in a third country, you may need to show why you are applying there and not in your home country. If the consulate in that third country has any questions about your case, they are more likely to deny it and tell you to go home to get the visa. In that case, you will not be allowed to come back to the US until you get that visa in your home country.
Thanks, Robin. Is L1 a difficult category for an employer to sponsor you for, given that you've worked abroad for them?
The L1, there was actually an article in Forbes that I'll send you also that just talking about, everything gets harder and easier in our business over time. So, some of these things that we talked about are getting easier. The L1 is getting harder, but it's still a great visa. The bottom line is it involves working abroad for a company for a year and then being transferred to an affiliate or a branch here. Could be a big company like Pepsi. It could be a small business. It could be a little nonprofit. But what they're looking for is specialized knowledge. And this is the key. They're trying to show that they're trying to say, well, if the job requires a PhD in chemistry, why can't they just hire a PhD from chemistry here? And I think what you have to do is show that there's something about the job there's something proprietary, that the research they're doing, or the way the company creates its products that is special. And so it's not easy, but it's a great tool. And there's no quota. So that's why L1s are such a great tool for bigger companies, is if you don't make the H-1B lottery at Microsoft, they can send you to Canada and bring you back in a year on an L1.
Thanks, Dan. My F1 visa has expired. Is it okay if I plan to travel to a US territory like Puerto Rico? My question is related to spring break.
Well, for Puerto Rico in particular, sorry, Puerto Rico is part of the United States, so there is no visa stamp required, but there is an immigration check because it's an island. So I would just make sure that you have your documents anyway. Your updated I-20, or I don't know, Robin, does your office give advice also about Puerto Rico? I would just make sure you're ready, because there's an immigration check.
We caution students that even it is a US territory, there is an immigration inspection that you have to go through. Do you need a valid visa to come back in? Probably not, but because you're going through an actual inspection, I would be a little bit careful about that.
And our last outstanding question right now is, sorry, I spoke too soon. One more just came in. How soon can I apply for a waiver from the onset of your J1 visa, and what are my chances of getting the waiver?
All right, I'll try to give a quick answer. Sometimes people apply for a waiver really fast because they want to do it and they think it's a thing to do. But again, the J1 research scholar category is 5 years. So if you apply for a waiver, you won't be able, and you have 2 years left, you won't be able to extend. So I would say don't apply for the waiver until you've gotten everything you want out of that J1 visa, including extensions. In terms of how hard it is, if there's any government funding from the US government, from your home country government, from an intergovernmental organization like the EU, it's going to be a lot harder. And some countries, almost every country will support waivers, but some countries are more efficient about recommending them. So it's good to get advice.
Let's see. I am from India, currently doing a PhD. What's the best category and time to apply for a green card after my PhD?
You know, the best time to apply for a green card, I don't mean to, is when you're sure you want to stay here. So if you're not sure, then I would take a deep breath. But an employer-sponsored green card will be easier, cheaper, and faster than a self-petition green card. So if your temporary visa is working for you, I would wait and then talk to your employer about it when you finish the postdoc and you have a job.
Not sure if it makes a difference, Dan, but the same questioner followed up and said that they're planning to work in nonprofits.
Mm-hmm. Nonprofits can sponsor green cards also. So they may have less of a budget for that, but it's definitely possible.
Okay. How do you suggest if I apply for an F1 visa on Canada, Mexico, US Embassy? I have an expired F1 visa. Is there any risks in it?
Well, the risk is the Canadian or Mexican consulate would deny your visa, and then you would be stuck there and would have to fly back to your home country to make the application there. I would be careful to be able to explain why you have to apply in Canada or Mexico and why you cannot go to your home country. You know, anytime you apply for a new visa, there is a risk of denial. Each visa application is unique, and the consular officers look at the circumstances surrounding the application. Dan, do you want to add something to that?
No, just that, you know, before COVID, that was a more common option. Because of some COVID backlogs, you know, if you're not a Canadian citizen or a Canadian resident, you're at the bottom of the list for getting a visa appointment there. So it may be harder for a while.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that brings us to the end of our questions. I don't see any others popping up. So I just want to say thank you again to our panelists, to Dan, to Robin, and to Shelley for being with us today. This was a great session, such great engagement from the audience, and we really appreciate it. If you need to refer back to this, give us about a week to get a transcription and captions added to this video, and we'll get it posted on the Research Live website along with the slides that were used today and a document that'll have all those links that I dropped into the chat at the beginning of the event. So this is the first in a relaunch series of Research Live events. I hope you'll make some time to be with us for 2 more events this spring. Friday next week, March 11th at 11 a.m., we'll have some leaders from the Office of Research Integrity and Safety to talk with us about news from their shop, including UGA's new Conflict of Interest Management Program, an expansion of the Human Subjects Office, university's new policy regarding minors in research spaces, and other news. And then on the second Friday of next month, April 8th at 11 a.m., we will have some of the leaders from Innovation Gateway here to talk about news in the world of innovation and research commercialization. So please check the website for more details about those events. And again, thank you to Dan and Robin and Shelley for being with us today, and all of you for your great engagement. And we will see you next time on Research Live. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you, Mike.
Mhm.
Yeah, thanks.